All right, good morning. My name is Vinay Tannan, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of Decision Point Informatics. Our first flagship product is Heart Pathway. It's an evidence-based FHIR application that provides clinical decision support to physicians when patients present to the emergency room with chest pain. Really excited to tell you about it and how we're taking advantage of the emerging new technologies and FHIR interoperability. Before I dive right in, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about our team. Our Chief Executive Officer, Iltafat Hussain, is an emergency medicine physician at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, and actually we're based in Winston-Salem, just down the road. He is also the founder of imedicalapps.com, which is a trusted source for news and information on everything related to medical apps. And he's a mobile medical technology expert, often relied upon by governing bodies and regulatory bodies for decision-making and strategy. Our Chief Medical Officer is Dr. Mahler, also an emergency medicine physician. He's a clinical research expert. He's the architect of our first product, Heart Pathway. Our Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Gilmore, oversees all things technology, including software design, development, as well as medical informatics, machine learning, some emerging areas that we're really excited about with our company and our products. And of course myself, I have a PhD in biomedical engineering with a focus on medical devices and instrumentation, registered US patent agent, so I've been in innovation strategy, new product and new business development for well over a decade now. So very excited to have this team put together and start to work on some really new, exciting products. I have a logo at the bottom here, NC IDEA. I just wanted to give a shout out to these folks since we are in the triangle. They've been phenomenal for us. We were one of 140 applicants for the fall business competition, and we're excited to be selected as one of the 5 winners in December. So for any emerging companies and technologies, definitely check them out. They've been really helpful to us as we've been getting going as a company. So any great medical technology has to come from solving a clinical problem. And our goal was to solve the problem of chest pain. So just a little bit about the numbers. There are over 5,000 emergency departments in the United States. They see 8 to 10 million patients a year. And we spend about $13 billion in the United States in caring for these patients. So here's the problem. Greater than 50% of those patients are being admitted when in fact less than 10% of them are ultimately diagnosed with an acute cardiac syndrome. So clearly we are over-admitting, we're over-testing, and we're overspending by a tremendous amount. Not only that, we're subjecting patients to tests and exposure to invasive tests particularly and other risk factors of being in the hospital that they ultimately don't need. Not only that, when we do discharge patients, when we're sending them home, 2 to 4% of the time we're missing acute cardiac syndrome. So imagine that, 100 patients, you send four of those that are being sent home are getting a heart attack or some other adverse outcome that we don't want to see. So clearly something has to be done to improve how we care for these patients. This inspired Dr. Mahler and his colleagues to think about whether they could come up with a solution to improve risk stratification and clinical decision-making for these patients. They gathered over $2 million in funding, working with incredible agencies like NHLBI, American Heart Association, the Donaghy Foundation. Dr. Mahler is also the head PI on a large multi-site program project with Carolinas Collaborative. And this work spanned industry relationships as well with Abbott and Roche. So really exciting work here. And the goal is not only to develop a clinical research tool, but be able to take that, turn it into a commercially viable and scalable product. And that's really where FHIR comes in for us. But when we got started, our company's pretty new. We're only 10 months in now. About 6 months ago, we developed an iPhone iOS app, and we launched it in the App Store. I encourage you to try it out. It's free for download. And the goal was to be able to say, can we put this in the hands of more physicians so that they can use it, they can experience it, and ultimately, can we affect the quality of care? And what we found is that that's absolutely true. We've had over 3,000 downloads by users. It's been used, I think, almost 20,000 times now. And when we look at the data that's resulting from the use of this iOS app, it correlates incredibly well with the clinical research tool that we've been using at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, meaning it is, in fact, being used with real patients. And at the core of our company's mission, that's what we're trying to do. So what we found is that a lot of these physicians were coming to us saying, how can we get this to interact and interoperate with our electronic medical record systems so that it's more seamless clinical workflow, more interactivity, we can get the results written back to the patient record, and so forth. And that's exactly what we started working on using Smart on FHIR. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and show you a demo.
The application launches with a patient context from the EHR, where the provider then authenticates, and the application begins querying FHIR resources in order to pre-populate relevant parts of the heart pathway algorithm. The application then presents the provider with a series of yes/no questions about the patient, starting with presenting symptoms, followed by relevant risk factors. Note that the high BMI is a risk factor that was auto-populated from FHIR resources. Finally, any ECG abnormalities are selected, and the results can be calculated and displayed. The provider is given a numerical FHIR score, along with a risk categorization of either high or low, and the recommended next steps. The provider can then write these results directly back to the patient record as a note, or use the natural language HPI we generate as a starting point for further customization.
And there's a lot of other things we're building in. This is the early iteration of our product. Now, it may look incredibly simple. That was intentional. The goal is it has to be easy to use. It has to be easy on the eyes. Physicians have to want to use it because the app is only as good as it being used. However, behind the scenes, there's a tremendously powerful algorithm, weighting scores, calculations that are being able to deliver these types of results at a very accurate level in terms of how to make smarter decisions for the patients. Heart Pathway delivers results. There's a lot of applications, we all know this, that are out there that aren't validated. They haven't been effectively tested. They make claims that maybe aren't substantiated. This was proven out and clinically validated in a randomized control trial. Less than 1% miss of acute cardiac events. Actually, in the RCT, we had 0 missed heart attacks. And one key thing about this is that it's objective criteria. There's other pathways out there that say mildly suspicious, moderately suspicious. One physician thinks this is suspicious, another one thinks something completely different. In this case, it's all binary. Is it yes or no? And that makes consistency of care across all physicians, all hospitals, all regions. Also, what we've seen at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, over 90% physician adherence. So they really love using it, and that's critical in order to get adoption. We're reducing cost. In that test, this is extrapolated from our data set. We're showing over $7 million reduction in costs at Wake Forest in 2 years, 21% increase in early discharge, 12-hour reduction in the average patient length of stay. These are incredible numbers if you think about how we're affecting change. And also, we're reducing observation status. We're freeing up beds for the patients who can benefit more, and also where the hospitals can make more money, quite frankly. This has been used in over 10,000 patients. If you look at it from the patient's perspective, we're reducing unnecessary testing, reducing risk. They're getting out of the hospital quicker. And there's transparency in the care plan where the physician can say, here's how we're making our decision. This was proven out in a number of different studies. And the patients appreciate that transparency. I'm not going to go into the slide very much just to show that this has been published exhaustively in high-impact peer-reviewed journals like Circulation, American Journal of Emergency Medicine, and what have you. So how do we use FHIR? This is the fun part. We use it for provider authentication. So EMR bridges single sign-on with the FHIR authentication token. Pretty straightforward, and obviously this reduces just one extra password that somebody has to remember, but it also speeds up the launch sequence, so we feel that this is very important for integration and in clinical workflow. We use read access to query discrete observations. I mentioned age, BMI, things like that. We can incorporate that into the run sequence and also improve the accuracy of the inputs that are getting into the pathway. And then write access, being able to put things back into the medical record after runtime, the fact that it was run, and what the results were. Bless you. And one other thing I didn't put on this slide, but is incredibly important to us, is CDS hooks. Probably most people in the audience know about this, but to be able to trigger your pathway at the right time in the right environment is incredibly important. So imagine where a physician orders, say, a certain type of test, a cardiac enzyme. It's indicative of a chest pain patient. And so what we can do is automatically trigger heart pathway to pop up. The physician doesn't have to go looking for it and try manually trigger it. It just pops up in the clinical workflow. So we think that when it comes to apps, particularly CDS, that this is going to be really important. In terms of our status, we're pre-production. I say that, but we're launching at our first customer site, Cambridge Health Alliance, this month. It's a 3-hospital system, so essentially we're ready to go. I'll just quickly mention, although we are looking at clinical decision support and how important that is, we really see tremendous opportunity in the back end, the data that we're collecting, the ability to use that for interesting analytics. Here I show 2 examples. One, we're looking at practitioner compliance. Are the physicians using it? How often? Are there certain physicians who are being prompted but aren't using it? This is really useful for administrators. They can use this for decision making. They can use it for compliance, for education, and what have you. Also, when you look at the other image, we can look at patient outcomes data. We can see score distribution. How does that look at one hospital versus another? Administrators can do resource allocation based on this. Maybe we're seeing more high-risk patients in a particular area. And then, of course, tying that back to outcomes data in collaboration with our clients, where they can say, wow, we reduced costs by this many $1 million last year, or reduced length of stay. It's a very exciting opportunity there. So in terms of next steps, our goal is to bring Heart Pathway to as many sites as we possibly can, obviously. And one way to do that, I mean, again, the emergence of these FHIR protocols, being able to scale, being able to develop quickly, it's publicly accessible, it's fast, it's robust. It really has democratized the way that we're developing healthcare IT and different software algorithms to improve care. Another way that we're doing this, working with the major vendors, one example is with Cerner, to be able to launch in their app store, which we intend to do later this month. We're developing new clinical pathways and have a number of them in the hopper. And to that end, we're also creating machine learning algorithms on the back end to try and make them intelligent, make them smarter, more accurate over time. And if anybody in the audience is interested in chatting about R&D collaborations, we're always open to that. So I'd love to talk to you more. Just catch me at the conference here. And probably the last thing with our next steps, we're closing a financing round with our investors. So hopefully we'll be able to do that by the end of the month as well. Then we'll be off and running. So with that, thank you to the folks at HL7. Appreciate you fitting us in as a last-minute addition and being able to share our story here. I tried to keep it pretty high level, but we are excited about the technical side, and there's just so much possibility there. So thank you for your time.